Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs War Room Update. We are heavily into the operations in Rafa, into Rafiah. Rafiah, it's the same place, just different ways to pronounce them. Israeli forces operating there, really with ever-growing force. We saw just yesterday the elimination of 2 senior Hamas terrorists in Rafah. They weren't in the humanitarian zone as is being claimed. They were outside of that humanitarian area. These 2 people were responsible for running all of the Hamas terror activities in Judea and Samaria from the Gaza Strip. These were terrorists who were responsible for multiple murders, who had been arrested and sentenced to multiple life sentences, but were then released to the Gaza Strip as part of the deal to free Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit. So now we're operating there extensively. We're seeing that movement forward all the time. Just in the last, really almost 2 weeks now, Israel managing to bring back, sadly, only the bodies of 7 of the hostages. There are still 125 hostages being held by the genocidal terrorists in the Gaza Strip. It's all of them. It's Hamas, it's Palestinian Islamic Jihad, it's the PFLP, the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades. All of these Palestinian terror groups are all involved in the terrorism against Israel. They all participated in the October 7 massacre. They all took their own hostages. And that is part of the complexity of all of these operations. Yesterday, the terrorists who were targeted were hiding out, pretending to be, as they often do and as they almost always do, pretending to be innocent civilians, just going about their daily business, when sadly they're not. Now, unfortunately, war is a violent business. War is a violent business. People die in wars. That doesn't make a war inherently illegal. It doesn't make every civilian death inherently illegal. There are rules that guide and govern the practice of armed conflict. Israel really does adhere to those rules, strict adherence, and takes more precautions than any other army, I would say almost in the history of mankind, in order to try and mitigate the impact of the war on Palestinian civilians. We don't know how many people really have died in Gaza. We have different numbers. We have the Hamas numbers that were initially adopted and whitewashed by the UN, and then Hamas brought the numbers down, and the UN, in sort of this uncomfortable sense of damn, what do we do now? Excuse my language. Well, Hamas has said the numbers are lower, so we have to lower them, but we can't lose face and say that until now we've just been adopting the Hamas numbers. And so we have to come up with another way to present those numbers. Maybe we'll touch on that a little bit further later on in the program. In the north, we've seen the continuation of a full-scale war that is going on there as well. Hezbollah, another Iranian proxy, operating with also ever greater audacity, ever greater aggression, new weapons that they're using that are attacking Israel, and they are carrying on that war of attrition on Israel's north. From the south, the Houthis continue on with their Iranian proxy activities, both interfering with the freedom of navigation on the seas, firing all types of explosive projectiles at Israel. And so we've seen that coalition from the north, the south, the southeast, the southwest, the Iranian militias that are active in Iran, coming from Iran into Syria, that are also attacking and threatening Israel. Israel being attacked from all sides. And I haven't yet mentioned the terrorist activity going on in Judea and Samaria as well. All of that really pushing Israel's very, very thin waist from every single direction possible. And as we see that all playing out on our screens, for many of our viewers, it's playing out on your screens. For us in Israel, it's our lives. It's the fact that Israel has become accustomed, and we can almost take lightly the fact that the Iranians fired 336 ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and UAVs at Israel we're being attacked as we were yesterday and 2 days ago by Hamas, who are again attacking Tel Aviv, and millions of Israelis running to bomb shelters. This is our almost a daily experience. And within that wider context, obviously, of this small little country trying to defend itself against genocidal terrorists from all sides, we hit the international legal community. Now, the international legal community, we're going to focus today on the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and the International Court of Justice. These are two organizations that have really been hijacked. They should be good organizations. They should be professional organizations, but unfortunately they're not. They've been hijacked by the Iranians and the genocidal terrorists as a means to attack Israel. And to help us understand a little bit better what's going on there, we're joined today by our special guest, Andrew Tucker, who's the director of the Hague Initiative for International Cooperation, THINK, with a small c at the end. Andrew, thank you for joining us.
Maurice, always great to be with you. Thank you. Yes, wonderful.
So let's talk a little bit about the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. At the moment, they're really fulfilling two functions. One as the function in the context of the Convention for the Prevention of Genocide, where they're entertaining this idea of the South African practice, but Iranian-backed attack on Israel, accusing Israel by defending itself of committing a genocide. They're a little bit embarrassed there. If you look, here's a scoop for some of our viewers that hasn't really been discussed. I mentioned in our introduction the numbers of the dead in Gaza are unclear. So in the ICJ's decision in January, where they said that there were plausible rights of South Africa that had possibly been affected and needed to be protected, so they were issuing these interim measures and provisional measures. And there, as part of the description of what's going on, they say that, and I quote, according to UN figures, there have been 25,700 people killed in Gaza. That appeared in their report, in their decision in January 2024. The updated Hamas and then UN numbers are now talking about only 24,000 people being killed as of the 30th of April 2024. That means 4 months later, there are actually 1,000 people less that have been killed. Literally, dead Gazans are coming to life. And so, Andrew, explain to me a little bit how that whole system works. How does the ICJ, how can they look themselves in the eye and say, the information that we are using to base our decisions on is solid information? Justice Barak touched on it in his decision, saying accepting blindly UN statistics isn't something which the court should do. But it appears to be that he's very much in the minority.
Well, look, Maurice, this court was never set up to deal with this kind of situation. It's a court that was set up to deal with interstate disputes that are brought consensually by states to the court to be resolved. This whole thing of the Genocide Convention and issuing provisional measures in the midst of a very complex war situation, having to make quick decisions, the court is just not equipped to deal with this. It's not an inquisitorial court like we're used to seeing in continental systems or even in the common law system, where the court is much more active and it's actively making sure that any decision it's making is based on evidence that is brought before it by the parties to it. This court doesn't act in that way. It depends upon states bringing information to it and then making a decision on the basis of the information brought to it. It's 15 judges. They're representing a vast variety of different countries, different legal traditions. And many of them are not familiar with the details of this conflict or other specific conflicts. And they're asked to decide on the basis of this information brought, which South Africa then brings, and it just relies on the UN reports. So I think institutionally, the court is not set up to do this. And secondly, there's a bias in the court. There's a strong bias in looking at the judges who are appointed. The president of the court is a Lebanese lawyer who's been heavily involved in politics. He's a very anti-Israel position. He's taken it publicly on social media in the past, and he is presiding over a court that's supposed to be judging independently about the position of Israel in relation to Iranian and Qatar-sponsored terrorism. It's a complete mockery of the legal system, and I think it's absolutely unacceptable that the court is allowing itself, and it's done it in the past. We saw it 20 years ago in the Wall advisory opinion. It takes for granted the information that's regurgitated by all of these UN institutions, and takes them as being the absolute truth, which is totally ridiculous.
That seems to be a little bit of just to explain also to our possibly to our viewers who are a little bit maybe less familiar. The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, is actually one of the 6 branches of the UN. And one of its functions within the context of the UN is to provide advisory opinions to the General Assembly, to the UN. Already in 2001, 2002, 2003 onwards, the court was really highly politicized in that it was asked to give an advisory opinion on the legality of Israel's security measures that it had implemented to deal with the walking bombs that were coming from Judea and Samaria into Israel and blowing up in restaurants, in universities, on buses. And so Israel built a security fence, and it's called the Wall case, the advisory opinion on the wall. And there the court really made clear its position to the UN, saying, it's not a verbatim quote, but the gist of the decision was that since Judea and Samaria is not Israeli territory and it's occupied by Israel, so they claim, Israel has no right to self-defense against the terrorists who rise up to kill you. That was the long and the short of the decision at the time. And so now this same court, albeit different persona, is now judging on a completely different issue. This is now the Genocide Convention. It's the court of choice based on the convention, but doesn't necessarily have to function according to the same rules. Once you're a UN court, obviously you adopt what the other UN people have said. It's clear because they wouldn't in any way, even when it comes to Israel, obviously, distort the truth. They are completely neutral. They're not really, obviously. And so here you have this really a very problematic situation where, on the one hand, you have a court that says that Israel has no right to defend itself. At the very time that they're discussing the Genocide Convention, there is another process going on, right, Andrew, in the ICJ, where basically the court has been asked to say Israel is a criminal, and what ramifications should that have for the rest of the international community? And at the same time, well, you're also committing a genocide. All of these things go together before this court, which, as you said, just isn't in any way neutral.
Yeah.
How can that even have the semblance of called the International Court of Justice? What justice is there?
The whole thing is being driven by a group of states who, in my view, have basically hijacked the General Assembly. So if you look back at all these resolutions over the last 10 years, they're passed by a group of, say, 80 or 90 states, which is less than the 193 UN member states. It's the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which has 54 member states. It's the League of Arab States, and supported often by the African Union. And most European Union countries tend to go along with this reasoning whereby they get a majority. So this majority passed a resolution at the end of 2022, this is before the 6th of November, to ask the court for an advisory opinion on the legal consequences of Israel's systematic and fundamental denial of the Palestinian right to self-determination. And the occupation is being put on the table, and they're asking the court to declare that the occupation itself has become illegal. The Palestinians are driving this, the PLO. Let's not forget that the driving force is the Palestine Liberation Organization, which is still Israel's negotiating partner under the Oslo Accords, the organization set up by Yasser Arafat that still denies the legitimacy of Israel's existence, is driving this push in the General Assembly. And they've presented a very one-sided question to the court to look, as we've said, at the legal consequences. It's asking the court to assume that Israel is violating Palestinian human rights, their right to self-determination, and to give a declaration on this. So it's a highly problematic case. And of course, this is in the minds of the judges as they're also hearing the genocide case. And we're expecting a decision by the court, a ruling, an advisory opinion, any time in the next few weeks or months. But the overwhelming arguments before the court are very hostile towards Israel, and very few states have presented arguments, and Israel was not part of the process, so hasn't presented its arguments, whereby the court is presented with a framework or a paradigm or a narrative, which is to say Israel's presence in Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem is illegitimate. It may have been justified in 1967, but now, over 50 years later, there's no justification for Israel controlling these territories. And I think this informs the way they look at the genocide claims as well. Israel shouldn't be there in the first place. And Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are seen as legitimate representatives of the Palestinian people, opposing the repression of them by an illegitimate Israeli occupation. This is what we're facing.
Really, that is one of the fundamentals. When you're talking about, again, a legal process in at least in most, I think, Western countries, whether it be a European, continental, or other systems, but really justice systems that have any type of respect for themselves, when you have judges that are exposed to prejudicial material as part of an alternative proceeding, surely they should recuse themselves. When they have a predetermined bias against one of the sides, surely they should recuse themselves. And yet here we have that whole situation where a court that's already declared Israel unfit to even have the right to defend itself against homicidal terrorists, being adjudicated before a president of the court who is a representative of a country who's at war with Israel, whilst at the same time that same panel of judges hears arguments and is presented with material on a totally different subject, which also vilifies Israel. This seems to be the totally railroading any type of idea of natural justice. And yet this doesn't, it seems to be only a small people or group of jurists who are calling the court out for this. And everyone else seems to be accepting, well, they're there and really they're making decisions. And so it's not surprising when the court makes a decision, Israel is committing a genocide. So the detractors argue, based on the decision of the court, it isn't what the court said, but that doesn't matter. And that really is part of the story, which brings us to the decision really on Friday, What did the court actually say? Did they order, as I've seen immediately after the decision was being handed out, the highest court in the international court orders Israel to immediately halt its assault on Rafah? But that isn't really what the court said, right?
No, definitely not. Look, this is part of the problem that the court is very good at producing ambiguous judgments. And it does it quite deliberately because you have to imagine there's 15 judges who have to come to a combined decision on this situation. So inevitably, it's a kind of a compromise decision that they make. So 13 of the 15 judges have approved an order. What South Africa was asking for was an order that Israel completely and immediately stop any operations in and around Rafah. And they continued their claim that Israel has to withdraw from the Gaza Strip completely. Now, the court was not willing to go that far, but it came out with a ruling, an order which said that basically Israel must cease its operation in Rafah and in the environments of Rafah to the extent to which it would be destroying the Palestinian people in whole or in part. So the whole discussion is around saying, well, did they actually order that there should be an unconditional prevention or ceasing of the operation because they think it will be leading to a destruction of the Palestinian people? Or is it a conditional order which says Israel should only cease it to the extent to which the campaign is going to destroy the Palestinian people? And it's the latter reading which I think is absolutely the correct one. Two of the 13 judges came out with their own opinions separately, clarifying that they think what the court is actually ordering is not an absolute, not an unconditional order, but simply saying, okay, you can go into Rafah, you can take out Hamas, but you must make sure you're not committing genocide in the process. And that is what the court has said. If you look at it and just read it on its wording, which is really an order saying nothing.
It's an order
Because
saying nothing.
it's simply saying,
Nothing
okay,
whatsoever.
we allow you to carry out, just make sure you're not committing genocide in the process. And Israel says quite rightly, well, of course we're not committing genocide. The whole point of this operation is self-defense. We have to destroy Hamas. We have to get the release of our hostages, and we will do everything that is necessary and proportionate in order to achieve that legitimate military objective. And we will continue with our campaign. And no, we are not committing genocide because no, we have no intention to commit genocide. And secondly, we're not destroying the Palestinian people as a people. We are destroying, of course, there are civilian casualties, always collateral damage in any war, as you've said, Maurice. But this is a legitimate military campaign to achieve a legitimate military objective, and that is to remove the threat, the military threat that is presented by Hamas. So I think...
To release the hostages.
And to release the hostages, both of them being absolutely legitimate object. Not only legitimate, I cannot understand how the international community is not in outcry and not demanding that any restriction on Israel should be highly conditional immediately upon the release of all the hostages. The international community is being taken hostage by what Hamas is doing and allowing a kind of debate about whether Israel should be fighting there in the first place. So it's a totally inversion, I think, of the rules of war and of the rules of justice. We should be saying Hamas is a terrorist organization. Everything that is happening has been created by this gross and violent infringement of every principle of international law, and the taking of hostages is one of the worst crimes that be committed. So Israel should be doing everything possible, and we should be supporting Israel to do everything possible to ensure that these violations are not only prevented and resolved, but that in the future, no violations will happen.
And so that really takes us on, Andrew, with your permission, to the next part of that whole equation, which is now you have this idea that Israel is committing a genocide. Ambiguous language aside, you have this, I think, a predominant agreement between many of the different, at least commentators, news outlets, and really even some of the professional discussion that has already vilified Israel. Israel is responsible for a genocide. And then you have that whole political, really saga farce of the ICJ now spilling over into the International Criminal Court. There you have the prosecutor, Karim Khan, suddenly doing exactly what you just said, inverting basic morality and comparing between Ismail Haniyeh, Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Def, genocidal terrorists who sought to destroy Israel and murder as many Jews as possible, to Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, a country democratically elected leaders trying to defend their country against these homicidal terrorists. And for Karim Khan, they're all on the same level. These terrorists have committed war crimes, and these terrorists, as Karim Khan would have it, have also committed suicide, crimes against humanity and war crimes. And so you have that really whataboutism. Well, you can't only focus on the terrorists from Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Palestinian and the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine. You have to say also at the same time that Israel is in the dock. That basic loss of any understanding of what is good, what is bad, who are the aggressors, and who are the defenders. Now, Karim Khan last week announced that he was actually meant to be coming to Israel on a fact-finding mission. He decided instead of that, he was just going to submit a request to the ICC for arrest warrants. Do you believe that those arrest warrants will be issued by the court, Andrew?
I think it's highly likely. The court has a tendency to, at this stage of the proceedings, not to review the merits of the prosecutor's request. Technically, the prosecutor has to ask the court itself to issue the arrest warrants. That is based on a view that the prosecutor, Karim Khan, has taken, that in his view there is evidence, reasonable evidence that Israel is committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. I don't think the court will review that decision. It will put that off until such time as a case is actually commenced against them. One thing the court does, however, have to look at is a question of complementarity. The court only has the jurisdiction, first of all, in relation to nationals of state parties to the Rome Statute, or to crimes committed on the territory of a state party. The court's taken the view it has that jurisdiction. But secondly, it has to look at the question of the admissibility of the case. And one of the issues in admissibility is complementarity. And the court was only set up as a court of second instance, a court of last resort, to go into those cases where national courts are unable or unwilling to investigate or even prosecute their own leaders for war crimes. So what Karim Khan is saying here is, I do not trust Israel. I do not trust Israel's judiciary. I do not trust its legal system to take an independent view about whether Israel's military and political leaders are committing war crimes. Now, Israel's obligation under international law is to make sure that it does that. Every state, under general principles of international law, has to make sure, and Israel does this perhaps more than any other country in the world, to make sure, and it's doing it as we speak, reviewing decisions by the IDF, reviewing decisions even from its political level about the military campaign in Gaza, to make sure that Israel is working within the framework of international humanitarian law, international criminal law. And Karim Khan is saying, don't trust any of that. It's time for the court to take over because only we can create justice for the victims of Israeli crimes. And I think this is a fundamental problem, putting aside the morality of the whole question, is this view that Israel's legal system is not up to dealing with this issue. I hope the court will look at it, but I'm concerned it probably won't and will simply issue the arrest warrants that Khan has asked for. What will that mean? Probably at the end of the day, not a lot. It just means that Netanyahu and Gallant can't travel to ICC state parties because they'll be arrested. Germany has said, even being one of Israel's best allies, that it probably would arrest them if they arrived in Berlin because they would respect an arrest warrant issued by the ICC. Germany is a party to the ICC Rome Statute. That's problematic, but I don't think at the moment they're planning to travel anyway. But I think it's going in the wrong direction. That's the problem. This whole ICC thing is going in the wrong direction, and it's undermining the ICC itself. This is a highly political decision, and it's just showing that this court is totally inadequate and ill-equipped to be dealing with a very, very complex situation like we're in today.
I mean, there really we have the star of that whole process in the ICC is the idea of the court's recognition of a fictitious state of Palestine and then taking for itself jurisdiction that it doesn't really have to set the borders of that fictitious state. Now, we're not really talking about a situation where you have an established country and there is some kind of a border dispute. What the court had to do in order to entertain really the idea of the state of Palestine, this non-existent state being a member, it had to de novo demarcate the borders of Palestine, which is far beyond the scope of the jurisdiction of the court, and yet that's where they're going. And now Karim Khan issues an arrest warrant for on one of the crimes being, or one of the suspicions being, starvation of the civilian population. He makes outrageous claims about Israel cutting off water to the Gaza Strip. He ignores the fact that most of Gaza's water didn't come from Israel in the first place, and that they bought the rest of the water and weren't paying for it. He demands that Israel provide electricity, as if electricity is a basic right for any person in the world. Open brackets, there are about 1 billion people in the world, Mr. Khan, who don't have accessibility to electricity grids. And really the underlying theme there is that Israel must not only provide electricity to its enemies, but since those enemies are never going to pay, we should provide free electricity to 2 million people, because that's what you do when you're at war with another country. Mr. Khan, that is outrageous. Your assumption and your assertions are outrageous. And that's part of that discussion that's going of really politicizing every possible court. Now, this really does have far beyond, I think, Andrew, the idea of the ramifications for Israel. These moves really do, I think, put another nail in the coffin of international diplomacy to a great extent, of international organizations, in the same way as the League of Nations completely failed in its goal to avoid another world war. So it seems that the UN and all of its organizations and other associated but not connected international organizations are just imploding into this politicization. That can't be something that's good for the international community.
No, I'd agree with you. I think we're seeing the death throes of the system that was created in 1945, the UN system, to replace the failed League of Nations. You know, remember leading Jewish jurists like Hirsch, Lauterpacht, and others who saw the future of world peace and security was going to be protected and guaranteed by this new legal order. And it's failing us badly. I think Israel is the canary in the coal mine. The failure in relation to Israel is showing the failure of the institutions generally. And I think we have to review the question about the UN system as a whole. All of Western countries are putting in billions and billions of dollars into this enterprise, which essentially has been taken over by a majority of countries that are hostile to Western interests. If you look at the states that are pushing this agenda against Israel, it's the non-aligned movement. It's all those states which are seeking to undermine liberal democratic values. And the court system is simply a reflection, I think, of that underlying dynamic. I think there's another issue as well here for Israel, and that concerns Gaza, and I think it's true of the West Bank as well. And it's really a question of sovereignty. A lot of this has happened because there's been a vacuum of sovereignty that's been created since the Six-Day War, right? Israel was created in 1948. Its borders were not clearly defined. You look at the Declaration of Independence, the State of Israel was created in Eretz Israel. And ever since then, the world has been discussing what are the borders of Israel. And as long as the occupation paradigm dominates, there'll be a perception that Israel has no rights whatsoever in the occupied territories. And I think the question for Israel now is to say, do we accept this paradigm, or is it time for us to reassert our sovereignty as a state over the territories that we are going to have to keep controlling? 7th of October has taught Israel that the withdrawal from Gaza was a mistake, and it's simply not possible to withdraw from territories where Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and other Islamist regimes are going to take control. And we need a new legal paradigm for that. We need a new legal framework. And the legal framework is about territorial sovereignty. So in my view, this is the issue which is back on the table. It's not a popular one. It's a difficult one because Israel doesn't want sovereignty over territories that are hostile towards it. That's been the dilemma that Israel has faced. But at the end of the day, Israel will only be secure when it controls and removes Islamist jihad from the territories on its border. And to my mind, that's an exercise of sovereignty.
As Abbas Zaki, one of the Palestinian Authority leaders, says that the Palestinians, he doesn't say deceptively, but I'll add in deceptively, ask or talk to the international community about returning to the non-existent 1967 borders, only because they understand that Israel cannot survive in those borders. And therefore, the idea of sovereignty, as you mentioned, is really the fundamental of all of this. Where do you start? Where does Israel's sovereignty over the area from the river to the sea, which was historically allocated by the international community for the Jewish state, and then moving and changing paradigms of what people now call the two-state solution, which really isn't a two-state solution. The original two-state solution was Jordan as the Arab country, Israel as the Jewish country, and now we're talking about really a three-state solution, where also the area from the river to the sea will be again petitioned, and you'll have this really genocidal group that are controlling the high ground that overlooks Israel's heartland, and from the south, really another group of genocidal terrorists, and so on all really on all parameters. That the idea of creating another state to the west of the River Jordan is something which is fundamentally designed and will only lead to the destruction of Israel, which is why Israel so desperately rejects that suggestion. But as you say, it's that hesitance to take it the one step forward. If it's not another state, then maybe it should be part of Israel, and that's the hesitancy which possibly gives rise also to all of or many of the complications that we're experiencing.
Yeah. Look, it's a dilemma. It's a very complex situation. You know, on the assumption the Palestinians are not going anywhere, some regime needs to be created where I think a degree of autonomy needs to be created for the Palestinian people. But let's not forget that they have it. It's been created under the Oslo Accords. Areas A and B were created in order to give the Palestinians, it's not what they want in its entirety, but they have an enormous amount of autonomy over their own areas. And to my mind, they need to demonstrate that they can build good governance, they can build a peace-loving society that can live side by side or even as part of the state of Israel before moving to any suggestion or even talk about a two-state solution. So I think it's time to go right back to the basics and say the two-state solution is off the table. We need to go back to work out how to live together in this very small piece of land. And for the time being, Israel has sovereignty and security to ensure the security of the state of Israel, of everything from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River. And until such times the Palestinians accept that Israel has to live in security, Israel has the right to keep control of this area. But in order to justify that, you need to explain, I think, that the law of occupation is not the legal regime that governs these territories. It's the territorial sovereignty of the state of Israel that determines where its borders lie. And they are not the 1949 armistice lines.
Erroneously referred to as the 1967 borders. Andrew, unfortunately, as is unfortunately the everyday practice of this briefing, we've run out of time again. I tend to get lost in the conversation. At least I enjoy it, and very much enjoy hearing your insights. Something positive that you can possibly see coming out of these procedures. It's all very black, ostensibly. There must be some positive aspect.
Look, there are, and I think perhaps in a broader sense, I think there's a growing awareness that there's a fundamental problem, not only with the institutions of the ICC and the ICJ, but also with the UN system. I do see a growing understanding that Israel's dilemma is a real one. Israel's need for security is a real one, and that we need to go back to basics. So there's a political shift even in Europe here towards an understanding of the need for security. Look in the Netherlands, we have a new government which is more centre-right government. A whole discussion is now opening up here. And it's very much connected with the situation of Israel. And people are realizing our security, European security, is highly dependent upon Israel's security. We are facing the same challenges. So it's a global problem. It's not just Israel's problem. And I can see the same discussion happening in other countries around the world. I have a hope, and I believe there will be a growing coalition of states that will push back against what I think is a fundamental Islamist-driven attack on Western values, to stand with Israel in defense of what Israel really represents. And I'm hopeful in the midst of that.
We can only, I really do hope that you're right in your assessment, Andrew, that this understanding is becoming more commonplace, that Israel is not the aggressor, Israel is the victim. And really the hijacking of all of the international systems by a small group of countries in order to continue with the lawfare, political warfare against Israel is not.
That's right. I would say I don't think Israel is the victim. I don't think Israel is a player in all of this and has been taking decisions. And I think it's time for Israel, in a sense, also to take responsibility in a way that it's perhaps has not been inclined to do on the international stage, in standing for this issue of territorial sovereignty.
Sometimes
Because I don't, yeah.
Possibly a little bit insensitively compare Israel to the whole battered wife syndrome, where we know that we're getting beaten all the time. We know that this relationship with these organizations is entirely toxic, but we're not really ready, not really capable yet mentally to stand up and say we're ready to now defend ourselves, and we have this right to our own sovereignty, to our own territorial sovereignty, and everything that goes along with that, the right to defend ourselves. We don't
Correct.
need to care about the ICJ judges saying Israel doesn't even have a right to defend itself against genocidal terrorists. That, with all due respect, we don't care what you have to say. And so that is part of that process, really, that we also need to develop from and get out of. I think on that you're absolutely right. Andrew, again, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Maurice.
After 234 days into this war and
Yeah.
125 hostages left, we can only hope that this war will come to an end soon, with the defeat of the terrorists and the release of the hostages, and that we'll be able to discuss other issues of international relevance rather than just the war. In the meantime, everyone, thank you for joining us. If you like the content, you can go onto the JCPA website and click on the YouTube icon and subscribe to our channel. There is a donation button there as well, if you would like to join us and partner with us in our efforts to bring really the story of Israel to the international community, and to really act as that bridge between the Arab world, the Israel in the Middle East, and onto really Western societies. And we will obviously be very appreciative. In the meantime, stay safe, everybody, and we will see you again on Wednesday. Again, Andrew, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much.